Hello again from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. This video's title is Countdown or Timeline to the Second World War. Some people believe that, including some historians, that the Second World War actually started with the major Japanese invasion of eastern China already back in 1937, although officially it started when Germany invaded Poland on September the 1st, 1939. So in 1938, Germany had almost bloodlessly, almost without any fighting, been able to annex two uh, virtually Central European countries, although the other one of them, I'm sorry, in one Central European country and then being able to annex the western border regions of another country that is located or was located partly in Central Europe and partly in Eastern Europe. The first country was the Nazi German dictator Adolf Hitler's native land, Austria. The second one was Czechoslovakia. And by using that combination of threats and then promises and then the claim that he was simply defending the national right to self-determination of Germans, ethnic Germans, and claiming that supposedly Czechoslovakia was both discriminating against and oppressing its German minority, which was to a large extent fake news. Since the German minority of Czechoslovakia was treated overall better than many, probably most other ethnic minorities in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe. He was able to persuade the British and French prime ministers Neville Chamberlain and Edouard Daladier to agree under their policy of appeasement to the Munich Accord at the end of September 1938, which then resulted in the annexation of the so-called Sudetenland, inhabited mostly by ethnic Germans, in early October 1938. Czechoslovakia was humiliated by not even being asked to send any kind of, or allowed to send any kind of representative, whether a politician or diplomat, to Munich. This accord, however, as we know, was in place only for 5.5 months until March the 15th, 1939, when Germany annexed most of the remainder of Czechoslovakia. Back in October 1938, Poland had annexed the small region of Cieszyn or Teschen in northern Czechoslovakia, while Hungary had annexed a part of southern Slovakia, which did include quite many ethnic Hungarians, to be fair. But in March 1939, Germany then annexed a great majority of the remainder of Czechoslovakia, while Hungary was allowed to annex Carpatho-Ruthenia in the extreme eastern or southeastern Czechoslovakia. But let's look at the timeline more in detail. On January the 23rd, 1939, the Dutch war scare broke out. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris of Germany, more specifically of the Abwehr, or the German Military Intelligence Service for the Nazi German Army, leaked misinformation to the effect that Germany planned to invade the Netherlands, one of its western neighbors, in February, with the aim of using Dutch airfields to launch a strategic bombing offensive against Britain. So this was Mr. or Admiral Canaris's fake news. The Dutch war scare led to a major change in British policies toward Europe. On January the 26th, in the Spanish Civil War that would end at Officially on April the 1st, 1939, it had broken out in July 1936, and it would be won by the nationalist to far right Falange Español forces of General Francisco Franco, who would then remain the right-wing dictator of Spain until his death in 1975. They, aided by Italy, took Barcelona, the capital of Catalonia in eastern and northeastern Spain. In Paris, French Foreign Minister Georges Bonnet, in response to rumors, which are true, that he was seeking to end the French alliance system in Eastern Europe, gave a speech highlighting his government's commitment to the cordon sanitaire, whose purpose was to isolate Germany and prevent Germany from allying itself with the Soviet Union. On January the 27th, Adolf Hitler, the Nazi German dictator, ordered Plan Z, or Z, a 5-year naval expansion program intended to provide for a huge German fleet capable of crushing the Royal Navy by 1944. The Kriegsmarine was given the first priority on the allotment of German economic resources. On January the 30th, Hitler gave a speech before the Reichstag calling for an export battle to increase German foreign exchange holdings. The same speech also saw Hitler's prophecy, in quotation marks, where he warned that if Jewish financiers start a war against Germany, the result will be the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. So this was, we could say, Hitler's fake or distorted news. While there may have been some financiers who contributed to the events that led to the outbreak of the Second World War, or that accelerated its official outbreak, who may have been of Jewish origin, then this, of course, was an excessive reaction, because a great majority of the Jews had nothing direct to do with the Second World War's outbreak, and there were actors in the outbreak who were much more central than these allegedly Jewish bankers and financiers. On February the 2nd, Hungary, which was a right-wing dictatorship, joined the Anti-Comintern Pact, which was a German-led treaty against the Communist International Organization that was led from Moscow, the Soviet Union. The Comintern grouped the world's communist parties together, including those that existed in the Western democracies. On February the 6th, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain stated in the House of Commons that any German attack on France would be automatically considered an attack on Britain, so this was a so-called safety guarantee. In response to Georges Bonnet's speech, referred to earlier, German Foreign Minister Mr. Joachim von Ribbentrop, referring to Bonnet's alleged statement of December the 6th, 1938, accepting Eastern Europe as being in Germany's exclusive sphere of influence, protested that all French security commitments in that region were now off limits. After all, France had promised to help Poland in the case of an attack, and France had even promised earlier to help Czechoslovakia in case of an attack. On February the 10th, Spanish nationalists under Francisco Franco completed their offensive in Catalonia. On February the 27th, the United Kingdom and France recognized Franco's government. So this was probably an act of so-called realpolitik, or realist politics. They certainly were not showing an unwavering and consistent commitment to democracy, because ironically it was a democratically elected Spanish government that they were in the process of overthrowing, and they were in the process of instituting a right-wing and long-term dictatorship. In March 1939, the 1936 to 1939 Arab revolt in Palestine, or the Palestine Mandate area, ended. A mandate area meant an area, or mandate government meant an area that was given self-government in its preparation for eventual independence. And this mandate region or country was ruled officially by Britain. On March the 13th, Adolf Hitler advised a Slovak nationalist Josef Tiso to declare Slovakia's independence in order to prevent its partition by Hungary and Poland. On March the 14th, the Slovak Provincial Assembly proclaimed independence, and priest Josef Tiso became the president of the independent, in effect, puppet Slovak government, because the country was totally under Nazi Germany's control. Having intimidated through a combination of maybe pretentious rage and then the threat of a brutal occupation of the remainder of Czechoslovakia, the aged and sickly Czechoslovak president Emil Hácha in Berchtesgaden, Bavaria, Hácha, who even suffered a heart attack in the middle of Hitler's rage and had to be revived by shots in the arm or somewhere else administered by Hitler's personal doctor. Hitler then was able to send units of the German army to occupy most of the remainder of Czechoslovakia on March the 15th. The Ruthenian region of Czechoslovakia declared independence as Carpatho Ukraine, but it was annexed by Hungary, which invaded Carpatho Ukraine on March the 16th and occupied it by March the 18th. On March the 17th, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, in a speech in Birmingham, stated that Britain would oppose any effort at world domination on the part of Germany. The nationalist governments of Spain and Portugal was also a right-wing dictatorship being led by Prime Minister Antonio de Oliveira Salazar, signed the Iberian Pact in Lisbon, pledging mutual defense of the Iberian Peninsula and neutrality in the event of a general European war. On March the 18th, there was the so-called Romanian war scare. Mr. Virgil Tilea, the Romanian minister or ambassador in London, Britain, spread fake news or false rumors that Romania was on the verge of a German attack. Romania had a right-wing royal dictatorship led by King Carol or Charles II. On March the 19th, Hitler sent a registered letter to the government of Lithuania stating that Germany intended to annex the port of Memel. On March the 20th, at an emergency meeting in London to deal with the Romanian crisis, French Foreign Minister Georges Bonnet suggested to Lord Halifax of Britain that the ideal state for saving Romania from a German attack was Poland. The two countries had a short shared border in the Carpathian Mountains, so the southeasternmost Poland had a border with Romania. The problem was that Poland, in order to raise money for the development of its central industrial region, was selling many or most of the modern weapons and military vehicles that it had produced, and its standing army had mostly or largely old-fashioned airplanes and weapons, and mostly tankettes, in other words, light, small tanks. And since Poland was threatened by Germany in the west, north, and south, and by the Soviet Union in the east, Poland hardly could have offered much effective assistance to Romania. Sorry. On March the 22nd, after an ultimatum issued on March the 20th, Nazi Germany took Memel land from Lithuania. On March the 23rd, the Slovak-Hungarian War began. On March the 24th, 7 years came to pass since the worldwide boycott of all German Jews initiated by front-page declarations in Britain and the United States. Judea declares war on Germany. On March the 28th, dictator Francisco Franco, who was also a general, assumed power in Madrid, Spain's capital, remaining in power until his death in November 1975. Then, in a major turnaround from his earlier and notoriously failed appeasement policy, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain announced to the House of Commons on March the 31st, 1939, that he would guarantee the independence of Poland. On April the 1st, the Spanish Civil War officially ended when the last of the Republican or center-left forces surrendered. The rumor that Hitler was dead swept the United States as millions of CBS radio listeners heard the Führer cut off in mid-speech during a shortwave relay of his address at the dedication of the Tirpitz, the second of the 2 Bismarck-class battleships built for Nazi Germany's Kriegsmarine, or War Navy, during the Second World War in Wilhelmshaven. On April the 3rd, Hitler ordered the German military to start planning for Fall Weiss, or Plan or Case White, the code name for the invasion of Poland. On April the 4th, the Slovak-Hungarian War ended with Slovakia having to give up eastern territories to Hungary. And on the same day, Polish Foreign Minister Colonel Józef Beck in London signed a treaty designed to bilateralize Neville Chamberlain's Polish guarantee of March the 31st. On April the 2nd, Italy invaded its small Adriatic Sea neighbor, Albania, and King Zog fled. On April the 11th, Hungary left the League of Nations. On April the 13th, Britain offered a guarantee to Romania and Greece. Sorry. On April the 14th, at a meeting in Paris, French Foreign Minister Georges Bonnet met Russian Ambassador Yakub Suritz and suggested that a peace front comprising France, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, Poland, and Romania would deter Germany from war. On April the 18th, the Soviet Union proposed a peace front to resist aggression. On April the 28th, in a speech before the Reichstag, the nominal or rubber-stamped German parliament, which was totally dominated by the Nazis, Adolf Hitler renounced the Anglo-German Naval Agreement and the German-Polish Non-Aggression Pact. On May the 3rd, Mr. Vyacheslav Molotov, a close ally of the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, succeeded a more moderate communist politician, Mr. Maxim Litvinov, as Soviet Foreign Commissar or Soviet Foreign Minister. Mr. Litvinov had been committed to the collective security doctrine. He had favored a more conciliatory foreign policy towards foreign countries, including the major Western democracies. Besides, he was a Jew, which of course did not endear him to Adolf Hitler in any official negotiations. Sorry. On May the 6th, a leader of the informal or mostly underground German opposition and a former member of the abolished German National People's Party, Mr. Karl Friedrich Goerdeler, told the British government that the German and Soviet governments were secretly beginning a rapprochement or nearing to each other with the aim of dividing Eastern Europe between them. Goerdeler also informed the British of German economic problems, which he stated threatened the Nazi regime's survival, and advised that if a firm stand was made for Poland, then Hitler would be deterred from war. On May the 9th, Spain left the League of Nations. On May the 17th, the British government issued the White Paper of 1939, sharply restricting Jewish immigration to mandatory Palestine, so that during the next 5 years only a maximum of 100,000 Jews, 25,000 of them in emergency cases, would be allowed to immigrate to Palestine, and any subsequent Jewish immigration would have to be approved by the country's Palestine Arab majority. On the same day, Sweden, Norway, and Finland refused Germany's offer of non-aggression pacts, all the three Nordic countries, and of course the fourth one, Denmark, wanted to remain neutral. On May the 22nd, Germany and Italy signed the so-called Pact of Steel, which formed a very close military and economic alliance between the two right-wing dictator or far-right dictatorships. On June the 3rd, the Soviet government offered its definition of what constitutes aggression, upon which the projected Anglo-Soviet-French alliance would come into effect. The French Foreign Minister Georges Bonnet accepted the Soviet definition of aggression at once. The British, however, rejected it, especially the concept of indirect aggression, which they felt was too loose a definition and phrased in such a manner as to imply the Soviet right of inference or interference in the internal affairs of nations of Eastern Europe, because of course the Soviet dictator and his allies, the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin and his allies wanted to spread the so-called Bolshevik revolution westward. And they dreamed eventually of having many, if not most, of the world's countries either being officially communist ones, or at least ones that tolerated and accepted communism. Then, on June the 4th, a very sad and shameful incident. The St. Louis, a ship carrying a cargo of 907 Jewish refugees, was denied permission to land in Florida, southeastern United States, after already having been turned away from Cuba. Forced to return to Europe, many of its passengers later died in Nazi death camps during the Holocaust. And this showed that, unfortunately, US President Franklin Roosevelt, who would later condemn the Holocaust, was being hypocritical. He was mindful of that significant and vocal minority of Americans, including those of German and Italian origin, who strongly opposed the granting of asylums to Jews. And of course those so-called more native white Americans who had anti-Semitic tendencies and sympathies, including, sadly, many fellow Democrats in the southern portion of the or region of the United States. On June the 14th happened the so-called Tientsin incident. The Japanese blockaded the British concession in Tianjin, China, beginning a crisis which almost caused a British-Japanese war in the summer of 1939. On June the 23rd, talks were completed in Ankara, Turkey's capital, between French Ambassador René Massigli and Turkish Foreign Minister Şükrü Saracoğlu, resolving the Hatay dispute in Turkey's favor. Turkey therefore annexed Hatay. On July the 6th, the last remaining Jewish enterprises in Germany were closed by the Nazis. On August the 2nd, the Einstein-Szilard letter was signed advising US President Franklin Roosevelt of the potential use of uranium to construct an atomic bomb. On August the 4th, Neville Chamberlain dismissed the British Parliament until October the 3rd, but of course he would have to recall it later. And then other events. On August the 3rd, the medical licenses of all Jewish doctors in Nazi Germany were nullified. On August the 5th, which was Saturday, Poland sent Danzig, which was a free city under the League of Nations protection, but heavily peopled by Germans, and many, if not most of those Germans were either Nazis or Nazi sympathizers by 1939, demanding that interference with Polish customs guards on the border with East Prussia cease. East Prussia was then a German exclave separated from the rest of Germany by the free city of Danzig and the Polish corridor. On August the 6th, 1939, which was a Sunday, Poland celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Polish Legion's entry into the First World War. Marshal Edward Rydz-Śmigły, who was the Polish army's commander-in-chief, told a cheering crowd of 100,000 that violence inflicted by force must be resisted by force, and that Poland's conduct with regard to Danzig would be adjusted to the conduct of the other side, meaning Germany. On August the 2nd, 1939, which was Monday, Swedish businessman Birger Dalerus arranged a meeting at his house in Schleswig-Holstein, northern Germany, between his friend Marshal Hermann Göring of Nazi Germany and 7 important British businessmen in an effort to avoid war. The meeting was friendly, and Dalerus believed that an informal agreement was in place to hold a peace conference. Danzig rejected the Polish demand of August the 5th, refusing to recognize untrained Polish officials as supervisors of Danzig customs. Okay.